I solemnly swear that I am up to no good.
Hello, welcome to the Cinema Savvy Movie Podcast, and welcome to episode 6 of our Harry Potter month. Our last review was on Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, but we still have the last few Harry Potter films to get through. So our review today is on Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, which is the 2009 movie, based on the book of the same name by J.K. Rowling, directed once again by David Yates, which is actually the second load of movies where the same director has come back. During the middle few films, we had different directors, but it's nice that we have that continuity now. So yeah, this is going to be a spoiler-filled discussion all the way through, so if you haven't seen Half-Blood Prince, where have you been? Go and see that movie, read the book, do whatever you got to do and come back to us. But this is just going to be a basic discussion, sit down, casual chat about this movie and sort of the Harry Potter franchise in general. So yeah, we always kick off with memories on this one, so I'm going to let you start off with this one, George, because my memories on this movie are kind of weird. Yours are probably a bit more sensible with this one.
So this was the first Harry Potter film since The Prisoner of Azkaban. I saw it at the cinema. Mm-hmm. I can remember it clearly. It was the last day of term at secondary school. Everyone used to go cinema because we get half day people who go cinema or Mackey's or KFC. There was always something, and Harry Potter came out. It was my birthday a week before, so I had money, and I think I just walked up to the cinema on my own because no one wanted to come with me. And I got the last ticket in the entire showing of the Half-Blood Prince, which I was really happy about. And then there was a bit of drama in that people, I think, had snuck into the screening, so they were checking everyone's tickets. And I'd already thrown mine on the floor because back then I used to, so I was shitting myself, and they never actually asked me for my tickets, so that would have been very interesting. But it was absolutely rammed that day, and that's my memory of it, really. I got it on DVD at Christmas. And then I think that this time after I saw it was around Deathly Hallows time. I think everyone was rewatching them then. But yeah, it's more of a memory than the previous two films, but not as good memories as the early or later ones.
Yeah, well, you see, I thought your memory of this would be a lot more sensible than mine. I didn't see this at the cinema, actually. This was where I'd completely dropped off the Harry Potter bandwagon. I mentioned in my previous ones that was like a slow burn from Goblet of Fire to Order of the Phoenix in terms of the books and the films themselves, and by this one I just didn't care, and I just didn't go and see the movie at this point. And in fact, I didn't see this movie until, when did Deathly Hallows Part 1 come out?
November 2010.
Yeah, so it wasn't until the following year I watched this movie. It was when, I'll talk about this more when we get to Deathly Hallows Part 1, but a lot of my friends, sixth form, were getting back into Harry Potter, saying Deathly Hallows Part 1, it's the end of an era, it's the last one coming up, and we kind of need to see it because it was a big part of our childhood. And that's when I was getting back into Harry Potter, thinking like, yeah, it kind of was, and I'd like to finish off the series. And before I went to see Deathly Hallows Part 1, I borrowed this DVD off my friend, Half-Blood Prince, watched it the once, and then I went to see Deathly Hallows Part 1 the day after. And I remember at the time kind of not liking this film, and I think I even said that this was my least favourite Harry Potter film. I think I said that to you quite a bit as well. And then I watched all the Harry Potter films a few weeks ago, and then I got to Half-Blood Prince, and because I'd only watched it the once so many years ago, it was like I discovered a brand new Harry Potter film that I wasn't aware of, that I hadn't seen very much, that I didn't know much about. So I picked up a lot more stuff, and I don't think I'd say it's my least favourite one now. There was a lot in this movie I liked. I would say it's very similar to Order of the Phoenix in that it is very much a bridging movie to get us from point A to point B, which is Deathly Hallows Part 1. There's a lot of setup in this movie. And really, it's the most integral bridging movie, I would say, because this is the one that, I know we'll get onto it later, but it brings in all the stuff about the Horcruxes and Voldemort's past and sort of the setup, which will take us into Deathly Hallows Part 1. But we'll talk about that stuff later, so let's get on to with like new characters. We get introduced to a new teacher with this, with Jim Broadbent's character of Professor Slughorn. This guy's great. I love Jim Broadbent. He can do no wrong to me in every film. He kind of plays the same character in everything he's in, but he's just such a likeable actor, and it brings sort of like a new dynamic to the Hogwarts teachers. The previous films had sort of broken away a little bit from the whole teaching at Hogwarts and everything like that, so it was nice to get back to classes, like with the whole potions class and everything like that.
Yeah, and what I love about him is that he's not an idiot, but he's so, like, not twisted, but the fact a teacher has his own club to like pocket students and use them in the future for their careers, I thought was really funny, because he's just an old school teacher, and every time he comes on screen, you just love him when he's making like bambling noises or like snorting to himself. He's such a likable bloke, even from his opening scene where he's kind of sort of transfigured himself into a sofa. And
I love that effect. That bit's so cool.
He's just great, and I love him. He's got some of the funniest lines and some of the funniest bits of the film. He's just a really sort of nice comic relief to the darkness of this film, yet he plays arguably one of the most important roles in the whole series in terms of taking down Voldemort.
Yeah, and what I like about his character as well in how he plays it almost like he's constantly drunk, like in terms of his voice and how lyrical it is. And later on in the film, he does get drunk, which is one of my favourite scenes. I think that scene's hilarious, how he plays off Robbie Coltrane's character of Hagrid. And you're right, yeah, he is an integral character when you think about it. Ultimately, he was the guy who not put the idea of the whole Horcruxes into Tom Riddle's head, because he comes to him with that idea in mind anyway. But he was the one who told him how to do it, how it can be done, and he regrets that decision. And throughout the film, I like that whole mystery with the Pensieve, how he's tampered with the memory because he can't live with the fact that he's ultimately created the greatest dark wizard the world has ever known. And yeah, he is a great character, and it's nice to see, out of all the films, we got a little bit of this with Order of the Phoenix, with how Voldemort was trying to infect Harry's mind, and they keep saying he's very similar. In this one, I really like, because we get the flashbacks of Tom Riddle at Hogwarts, and then we see how Harry is in this film, you really do get that parallel between the two in this one.
Yeah, and even on some of the cinematography stuff, they will replicate some of the shots used in the Voldemort flashback to compare it to Harry. Whether that's just done as in Harry's character replicating Voldemort, but it's certainly a more interesting dynamic to it. And what I also find fascinating is the reveal that he's not the dark arts teacher as well, that Slughorn is the new potions master, and Snape finally got that dark arts role, which is this it's this great moment of victory for all the Slytherins, who you just hear cheering in the background, and like everyone else is just stunned silent.
Yeah, I don't know what I was expecting. I was expecting Alan Rickman to be a bit more like jubilant, because he got the position he always wanted, but even then he still seems like really dour, like he doesn't really care and he's miserable. I'm trying to think back to this movie. Do we see him in his defense against the dark arts class?
No, I think the only teaching we actually see is with the potions master. How did I forget Slughorn's name? Jesus. There's a moment with Snape on paper, but they cut it from the film, which made sense because it was kind of pointless. It just ties into another subplot that wasn't needed. But it would have been nice to see what he's like. We got to sort of look at it in Prisoner of Azkaban, how his teaching style differs from the others for dark arts. So I'd like to have seen a lesson, because in each film we do get lessons in the dark arts rooms.
Yeah, me too, and it would have been nice to have seen Snape actually give that class. We saw him cover for Lupin in Azkaban, which was a good bit of comic relief. But in this one, I don't know if it would have worked, because there is a lot of stuff going on with Snape. This is where he really comes to the forefront, and I don't know if a scene like that would have detracted from the drama that comes later in the movie. Ultimately, the film is titled after Snape, but at the end of the movie we learn that he is the Half-Blood Prince, so he really has an integral role in Harry's studies and just everything surrounding that, really. But I've said to you on a number of occasions that I think the whole concept of the Half-Blood Prince is a little bit pointless. Like at the end where, Snape turns on Harry and says, "I am the Half-Blood Prince," I'm like, great, okay, that's a neat bit of like character information, but does it have really any bearing on his plot or his character going into the next movie? And I don't think it really does. We learn that through this movie with the potions book that he was a gifted potion student, eventually becoming professor of potions at Hogwarts. He came up with a spell, Sectum Sempra, and that's really it. Like, it makes sense for this movie, but beyond that, it really doesn't have any carryover into the next movie. At least I don't think it does anyway.
Yeah, it's a weird one, because me and you spoke about it at length, and I said to you when I was rereading, I was like, I just want to get to the 6th book to find out how different it is, because I'm kind of like that he's the potions book. It's a good subplot, because in theory this could be called, Draco Malfoy and the Mission, or Harry Potter and the finding out of Horcruxes.
And this is actually your favourite book in the series, isn't it?
Yeah, it's my favourite book, and I'll go into that later on as we talk about each moment. But with the Half-Blood Prince stuff, I would like what they do in the book, that when Harry saves Ron's life in this, you don't find out it's because of the actual potions book. He just runs around and does something in the film, which is fair enough. But the way they build up is that the Half-Blood Prince has kind of helped Harry out for a whole year, and then you get to the ending and the Half-Blood Prince has killed Dumbledore. So there's this sort of begrudging aspect of it. But then again, it's so hard to translate stuff like that into a film. And then there's all these little things that Snape nicknamed himself the Half-Blood Prince because he's a half-blood and he took his mother's surname. So they kind of compared him that he got himself a Half-Blood Prince nickname, like how Lord Voldemort got himself a nickname. So all the comparisons are there. But again, stuff like that isn't really needed in the film. I like the potions book stuff, and ultimately just leads to Harry being liked by Slughorn because Harry's meant to be awful at potions before the films start. So it's just one of those where there's a small subplot which they had to include into the film. But you're right. I mean, in the film it's different to the books, like every single book to film thing is. But maybe just a few more lines could have helped it here and there.
And as I said, I don't know if this is my least favourite Harry Potter film in the series, because I did really enjoy it the second time I watched it, when I watched it a couple of weeks ago. A lot I didn't remember from it. But even me, as a casual fan of these films, I can tell that probably this one falls victim to the most of the case that there is probably a lot more in the book that didn't get translated into the film. And I don't know if there seems to be a lot of stuff in the film that either, if you're just watching the films, you might get a bit lost in. I think it would develop it more. Like all those parallels you just brought up with the Half-Blood Prince, I don't know how effectively they've translated to screen and how obvious they are. Some of the things are like the whole parallel between, Snape trying to help out Harry inadvertently through the book, and then later on in the movies he helps him out throughout, especially in Deathly Hallows Part 2. But I don't know, it feels like, I always said this to you, and we'll talk about the whole relationship side, but it felt very much focused on that kind of stuff rather than anything else, when I first watched it at least, and there is quite a lot of that in the movie. I don't know, it feels slightly awkward. I think that it will benefit, because I'm reading the Harry Potter books again now, I'm still on Philosopher's Stone, but I think when I get to this, a lot of stuff will make a lot more sense. The whole thing in this with the Horcruxes about how how Dumbledore's got that ring. Really, the ring comes out of nowhere. We haven't had any setup for it, and we really don't see it be destroyed at all in any of the movies. And we talked about that, how we were confused of how it actually got destroyed or what the hell happened to it. So I think there's a few bits in this movie, we say this all the time, that could have benefited with, slightly longer running time. But I actually think this was quite a long movie anyway. I mean, this was 2.5 hours just over. And I actually watched the extended cut of this one with all the deleted scenes back in. There's one great deleted scene involving Flitwick where he's doing a choir practice, and it's a really great bit of tension. That added about 10 minutes into it as well, so it was just shy of 3 hours. But then again, I don't know what else could have been added, because I haven't read the book, so I don't know what scenes could have been added that would have fleshed it out a little bit more.
I can talk about them now, where I can save it for the Horcruxes.
We can save it for... Is it all surrounding the Horcruxes?
Yeah,
we'll save it for that then. So we can talk about Quidditch. Quidditch finally comes back. Quidditch never gets old for me. They kind of, I would say from the third movie onwards, they threw it to the wayside a bit. They didn't want to focus on it too much. And I can understand why, because not really much plot happens when it's a Quidditch match. It's just a fun bit of spectacle and a good bit of immersion into the Wizarding world. We got a little bit in Azkaban. We talked about in Goblet of Fire how they were setting up for probably what could have been one of the greatest Quidditch matches we'd ever seen on the screen, and they cut it out. There wasn't any in 5 at all. There was a bit of flying on broomsticks, but Quidditch finally comes back in this one, and Ron gets to step up and become keeper.
Yeah, the Quidditch stuff I love because it's all in the 5th book, and they cut all the scenes, and Rupert Grint said, I was really upset about that. But it does make a comeback in the 6th film, and I think they only did it, not in a nasty way, I think they only did it because it sets up the relationship angle between Hermione, Ron, and Lavender Brown, which does come at the end of the Quidditch game when Ron saves the day. So I wonder if that's the only reason we do get the Quidditch stuff. I love the fact that it kind of develops Ron as a keeper and with no confidence. It all ties into the Felix Felicis, the luck potion. So it's great to have it back, and obviously Harry's the Quidditch captain now. Oliver Wood has left. But it's just nice for it to come back because it is an integral part of the story. And it's just great to see on screen.
And it's kind of like that Space Jam moment where you think that Harry's used the liquid luck in Ron's food or Ron's drink so that he can be an awesome Quidditch player. And it turns out that it actually was all down to himself. He had a little bit of help from Hermione, though, where she lets one of the Quaffles go through on the opposite side. Actually, no, they're training up on the same pitch, aren't they? But she lets one of the Quaffles go through. I can't remember his name. The jock.
McLaggen.
That's it. And like when I went into, because I'm more familiar with Deathly Hallows Part 1 and Part 2 and Order of the Phoenix, as I said, this was kind of like that Oddmark Harry Potter film that I never watched, but I knew it existed, and it was like the weird bridging movie. When it got to the last couple of movies, I always thought these relationships are very forced. Like, I don't see much chemistry between Rupert Grint and Emma Watson. I don't really see anything between Ginny and Harry. That stuff kind of just happened. But when I rewatch this one, this is ultimately the key in setting up these relationships. And I still think that the whole Ginny-Harry one is a little bit forced. Like, we don't get many scenes of them just talking to each other. But the whole Ron and Hermione thing I thought was a lot more believable when I rewatched this movie. And there are some great scenes with this. Most of them are involving the whole relationship thing. One of my favourite scenes in the film, and now I'm jumping the gun a bit, is where Hermione's crying on the staircase and she's got like the magic birds that are flying around. And then Harry comes and sits next to her, and I think she says, like, is this what it feels like? Or something like that. I thought that was a really believable scene. I thought they acted that part really well. And a lot of the comedy is involved with the whole relationship side of it, but when I rewatched it again, at first when I thought it detracted from the film and they focused too much on it, I don't think they did when I watched it again. I think it was all very necessary. Some of the Lavender Brown stuff gets really irritating though, but I think that's just down to her character with the whole 1-1 thing that she keeps bringing up all the time. That got really embarrassing and annoying. But the bit where Ron's in the hospital wing, for example, and Hermione's sitting by his bedside, that's a really nice scene. So there were a lot of scenes like that I were picking up more when I watched it a second time, and I think that the relationship angle is necessary because it does give it that somewhat of an emotional impact for when you get into Deathly Hallows Part 1 and Part 2.
Yeah, and I think the Hermione and Ron stuff is a lot stronger than Ginny and Harry.
Yeah.
And that's because Ginny and Harry is so forced, not just in the film, but literally when I was reading the book, Harry's just there and suddenly he's fallen for Ginny, just out the blue. He doesn't know it himself, and it just feels really bizarre, whereas the Ron and Hermione, you can kind of tease that across a few films, even a few books, if you look at the kind of small print stuff. So I think that's just a forced love angle, not helps that, not in a nasty way. I don't think Ginny's that great an actress. They do not cut a lot of her lines, but she's far more sassier in the books than she is on the screen. But the actual, I think the Ron and Hermione stuff's done really well, because when I was younger and first saw it, I was like you, I thought it was a bit pointless, but then it does lead up to the Deathly Hallows stuff, which gives their relationship far more credibility. But with the Lavender stuff, I mean, you hate her so much because she's just so annoying. So when she does get mauled by Greyback in the next film, you're kind of happy. It
is kind of blink and you'll miss it moment, though, isn't it, in the next movie? And I mean, I didn't remember who it was when I saw Deathly Hallows, and it wasn't until I rewatched this movie I clocked on who it was. But I think just like with Ron and Hermione in general, they've been, as characters, they've been through so much more than Ginny or Harry ever have. I mean, really, that was just Chamber of Secrets at the end where he goes in to rescue her. And that's really, I know in Chamber of Secrets there's the moment where they're at Ron's house and she runs down the stairs, locks eyes with Harry and kind of awkwardly runs away again. So we get a little bit of setup like that, but nothing in terms of character. With Ron and Hermione, we've seen them for, well, this was 6 movies, where, you know, they've laughed together, they've cried together, they've been on all these adventures, so I think there's a lot more there. There's a lot more basis for a relationship. I still don't think the chemistry is fantastic between Rupert Grint and Emma Watson, don't get me wrong, but I think it's a lot more believable, and it's kind of earned a little bit more than it is with Ginny and Harry. And I actually think that, hasn't J.K. Rowling gone on record and said she really regrets putting Ron and Hermione together? She wished she'd have put Harry and Hermione together.
I don't know if she regrets it, but I think she said it was the easier option to put Harry and Hermione together. So I think she almost kind of said that in a sense that she challenged herself to make Ron and Hermione a thing. Yeah. Which I think I do prefer Ron and Hermione because it would have been, she's right, it would have been far too easy to have had Hermione go with Harry.
And they are kind of like polar opposites of characters, aren't they, that eventually grow together. If you see from the first movie, she's the posh stuck-up brat and Ron's just kind of the down-to-earth everyman who's a bit slovenly and everything like that. So it is a nice match at the end, I think. So the big focus of the film is relationships. The other one is the setup for the Horcruxes, which takes us directly into Deathly Hallows. So George, if you want to talk about this one a lot more, you can go into depth with the books.
Yeah, so if I start with the films,
yep,
the only actual bit of Horcrux information we get is the what's his name, the Slughorn flashback. and which it works to its credit. It keeps it quite, not sly, but it keeps it quiet about what the Horcruxes are. Then we get some of the flashbacks with a young Voldemort where Dumbledore first meets him. He's sort of not interrogating him, but he says, you won't be stealing stuff at Hogwarts, blah blah blah. So I think you probably get 3 scenes total with young Voldemort, I'd say. Whereas in the books, this is where it differs, and although I hate saying in the books, this is the most important one because we get about 4 or 5 flashbacks with young, probably 7 or 8. I'm just gonna say before we get to the final one with Slughorn,
Right.
and we get a really good look at his backstory. So you find out about his mother, who was basically a crap wizard, part of the Gaunt family, who are Slytherin's ancestors, giving a love potion to a local wizard. No, it was a local muggle called Tom Riddle, who she fancied. Her family's the weirdos, the village. His family's the rich ones, as you can see in the mansion from the 4th film. And Voldemort is basically conceived under a love potion, which is the concept that he can't feel love, which is actually very important to the films, or to the story itself. Then we get some future ones of him growing up, that he refuses any help to get to Hogwarts with people. He wants to do it all on his own at Diagon Alley, stuff like that. We get a few things of him at school. Dumbledore's always kept an eye on him. But then it gets really important when you find out about the Horcruxes, that the ring is Tom Riddle's dad's ring. He kind of steals it from his family and sort of kills a load of people when he's a teenager, blames it on technically his uncle, who doesn't know who he is. I'm kind of babbling on here, but there's so much story that these books go through in the flashbacks, but what you get the information of the Horcruxes, and they make it clear why and what they are. So if you flick to Deathly Hallows, you have the locket, which is just a locket, whereas really that's Salazar Slytherin's locket, the founder and his ancestor. You get the Gaunt ring, which is his ancestors, but what they make clear is that Voldemort, he wants all of his Horcruxes to be grand things. So then you think, but the diary is not grand, but obviously that was his plot to get the Chamber of Secrets reopened, which was given to Lucius Malfoy. There's this bit of detail that Voldemort was absolutely fuming when he found out Malfoy already tried to release it, but they make it crystal clear that he's only after to make his Horcruxes the grandest of items. So Slytherin's locket, Hufflepuff's cup. We don't know about Ravenclaw until part 2. We're aware that he was looking for a Gryffindor item, but it just gives a bit of backstory to everything. You get backstory to Voldemort himself, his family, what he was like when he was younger. We get a job interview with him trying to get to the Dark Arts job, which makes sense as to why in the future films he hides a Horcrux in Hogwarts. I'm trying to do this without babbling too much. No, it's fine. Go on. It adds so much to the world and the stories that when you do get to Deathly Hallows, you understand why Harry knows what each Horcrux is, because he's seen them in a flashback and he already knows. He knows how Voldemort's going to act about it.
It's that simple case with movies, isn't it, where with an adaptation they kind of have to just give you the cliff notes. And I would have loved to have seen all that stuff, in all honesty, because I think that some of the most fascinating bits of this movie are seeing the young Voldemort flashbacks. The one who plays the young Voldemort is played by Hero Fiennes Tiffin, I think his name is, which is a fantastic name. He's actually Ralph Fiennes' nephew, so it was nice that they had that continuity there and you could have that family resemblance between the two, which makes it for a more smooth transition when you eventually get to Ralph Fiennes. And I think the older actor as well plays him fantastically, and it would have been nice to have seen more of the character. It really is just sort of when Tom Riddle was a young boy and you can see that he's a troubled, haunted kid, and after seeing Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them Now, without going into spoilers in case anyone hasn't seen it, you can kind of see how Ezra Miller was playing it as well with the character of Credence. So you can see a lot of parallels there between how tortured the characters are. And I think I made the comparison, I don't know what review it was for Harry Potter's, but I mentioned about the whole Jake Lloyd, Anakin Skywalker thing, how I don't think he was the right choice for that because there isn't that element of darkness to him, whereas Ralph Fiennes' nephew in this, you really can see that, and as soon as you see this kid, you know he's going to be bad news, and I like that. And it's almost tragic as well because Dumbledore goes to visit him in a really cool flashback, and you can see that Dumbledore's trying to change him and trying to teach him that he can use his powers for good, he can learn to control them, and ultimately, although he can control them, he does so for the wrong reasons. I think the guy that plays young Tom Riddle, not really young Tom Riddle, the one at Hogwarts, is fantastic in this movie. Then they did want to bring the actor back who played him in Chamber of Secrets, but I think you mentioned as well when he played him in Chamber of Secrets, he was a lot older than the role required, and at this point of the film, I think he was like 30, and they just purely couldn't have him based on how old he was. But I think the new actor plays him really well. He's very sly. He has a lot of like evil kind of smiles he throws in, which might be a bit cliched, but it kind of works in the moment. I would have loved to have seen those extra scenes, but maybe that would have slowed the film down a little bit, and I think they did give us all the basic ones we needed. I think it would have just fleshed out the character a little bit more of Voldemort, and maybe because Harry Potter's so fleshed out, it would have been nice to have got the same treatment for Voldemort, but it doesn't detract from the character of Voldemort. I think you still get everything you need, but it is really the Horcruxes that I do get lost on a bit, like the whole ring. It just, as I said, it kind of comes out of nowhere, but that makes a lot more sense now in the book. And I think you actually told me that, I don't know if this was one of our reviews or behind the scenes, but you mentioned that the Resurrection Stone is actually part of that ring. It's the gem on that ring, isn't it?
Yeah, so we find this out in Deathly Hallows Part 2. The Voldemort isn't aware that the Gaunt ring, the way the three brothers work from the Beal of the Bard story, is that they've all got ancestors, and Voldemort is an ancestor of the brother with the Resurrection Stone. What it is a family item. They put the Resurrection Stone inside of that ring, and it's not mentioned in the 6th book. It's mentioned in Deathly Hallows. When when Dumbledore's talking to Harry about the actual Deathly Hallows, which is cut from the film, he mentions that Voldemort was unaware that the ring had the gem. So when Dumbledore found the ring, he kind of knew straight away. And they never show him destroy the ring. It's kind of cracked on the top because he's took the Resurrection Stone out. So it's just these little details here and there. But what I did think that it would have helped the viewers a lot more if they would have known what the Horcruxes not necessarily looked like, but the fact we get a bit of backstory to the Helga Hufflepuff Cup meant that when they break into that Gringotts vault, you know why it's that one. Whereas in the film, Harry just goes, "It's that, I know it is," but we don't know that.
Yeah, you can just feel it. You can just sense it, can't he, in the movie?
Yeah, and I prefer how they did it in terms of he saw this before and we're going to go off his record. But again, would that have added more time? I don't know, but I think 2 or 3 scenes would have helped. However, this is one of the longer Harry Potter films, so maybe they had to cut a lot more than they wanted to.
And when I'm thinking back to the movie itself, I'm not really sure what scenes I could have cut. I maybe would have trimmed some of the relationship scenes, but as I said, when I rewatched it a second time, that really wasn't a problem for me. Other scenes we can talk about as well that I know I'm sort of like delaying the major ones here, but one that just came to mind is the whole Aragog thing with Slughorn and Hagrid. We get to see Aragog back from the second movie, gets a little bit of a farewell, but this sort of like brings me on to another subject I want to talk about. When I watched this one, I thought the special effects in this one were probably the worst ones in the series, and I'm not quite sure why, especially in the Aragog scene. I'm not sure if because there's so much CGI in it, but like the whole green screens in the film, and I think the colour palette has a lot to do with it as well. It's got like it's like almost like a greenish tint to the whole movie, and it looks very weird. It's not what we've seen in the Harry Potter films before, and the effects just kind of threw me off in this one. I don't know if you had that problem or not, but for example, like when we talked about Chamber of Secrets, they built that Aragog puppet, and I haven't been to the studios, but I've seen trailers and I know that the puppet's there and it looks great. Even the actor Rupert Grint, who is terrified of spiders, he was uncomfortable on set because of how realistic it looked. When we get to this movie, even though it's close up in the foreground, it's a CGI spider, you've got a CGI background, and a lot of the effects in this movie didn't look like they were finished to me. They get a little bit in the cave as well with Dumbledore with those weird golem things that come out of the water. I noticed that when I watched it a second time. I don't know if you had that problem or not.
Yeah, and I've always noticed the green screen on the Aragog was so obvious. I mean, they're not standing on a hill, you can see it. Whether or not they were pushed for time, because they certainly had the budget to do decent CGI. And in terms of CGI, this is a film where there's a lot less than the future films and previous films. When you think about the spells and stuff, really, the only spell which has consequences is the Dumbledore of the Fire one in the air. There's no incredible duels or stuff like that, and it's very weird because it is noticeable. And you're right with the colour palette, there is something going on. Even in the sort of Hogwarts corridors, it seems a bit orangey as well as the greeny when you're outside. But the Aragog stuff, it just kind of turns up in the film. Like, it's a nice subplot of the Felix Felicis thing, but like I'm going to say again, in the books, they kind of hint throughout, because each book goes across the school year.
Yeah.
And Hagrid keeps telling them that Aragog's going to die soon. You know, I want you guys to be there when he dies. He's like, family, blah, blah, blah. So there's these funny moments where everyone's like, but he tried to kill us and all this stuff. And then it just adds a bit more Hagrid stuff, which we don't see in this. But then again, it's not vital to the story they're telling at length. So I can understand why it has been cut.
And it does lead eventually to one of my favourite scenes of the movie where Slughorn is sharing a drink with Hagrid, and then Harry and Slughorn get a very, very nice moment together. A good bit of duologue going on there. But I think if I was going to cut something for time, it probably would have been the Aragog stuff. But then, you would be sacrificing that moment that follows it. I don't know, it was just something I noticed with the effects in this one. It was a bit strange, but let's get on to the main sort of bulk of this story other than the Horcruxes. And to me, although it's called Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, I would argue that the main character of this movie is Draco Malfoy, who hasn't really had a lot to do in the last couple of films, really comes to the forefront in this one, and it's by far, out of all the movies, Tom Felton's best performance. It's heartbreaking to watch him in this movie. We get told that he has been chosen to become, I guess it's like another Death Eater, right, or to carry on the task that's been assigned to him to kill Dumbledore. And we've seen Draco Malfoy in all the movies. He's been the archetypal school bully. He's been, just a slimy character. But in this one, he's got to become a murderer. And we see that he doesn't want to. And it's really, really just... The scenes that we get of him are just fantastic in this movie. It's a lot of scenes with him on his own where you can see that he's wrestling with this task that he's got to do, and he doesn't want to do it. It's not the kind of person he wants to be. Yeah, he's not a good character, an inherently good character, but he's not a murderer, and he doesn't want to become that. We see him using the Vanishing Cabinet. And those are some really creepy scenes, actually. And watch it again with the whole canary thing. It reminded me a lot of Prestige for some reason. The whole teleporting cabinet thing. But one of my favourite scenes in this film is when Tom Felton is just where he goes to the bathroom. I think it's right before the duel. And he just breaks down in tears in front of the mirror. And it's so believable. And we haven't seen this side. We haven't seen this vulnerable side to Draco Malfoy before. We've seen him kind of, think he's the big shot and then get, either sent away or he runs off, escapes with his tail tucked between his legs. But in terms of like his actual core of his being, like in emotional distress, and he is crying, it's a great scene. And pretty much everything involving this character, and that's why I would say that it's his movie, because he's ultimately the character that gets given this task, and it's sort of his journey we follow, even if we don't follow him the whole time, even up until the very ending. It's all his character.
Yeah, and I think what I love about the whole Malfoy subplot is we find out about it from the very beginning. It's putting the pieces together as to what he's doing. You get the whole unbreakable vow stuff with Snape, and Narcissa kind of says, he's only doing this to punish Draco because obviously Lucius is in Azkaban for failing in Order of the Phoenix. So although Voldemort's not in this film, that presence is there, and especially tying into the Draco stuff, because at the end of the day, he's a 16-year-old that's been told he's going to have to kill someone, and that someone's his like head teacher who he probably doesn't dislike, but he makes out he does. And there's the whole, he poisoned Katie Bell stuff. That's the whole breakdown. And I think it is Tom Felton's best film because he's got so much more to do. And I think even he said, for the first time, he's not running around shouting Potter. He's actually doing stuff.
Yeah.
And it makes for some of the more impactful moments. And it also teases the Elder Wand, which we do not find out about till the next film.
Mm-hmm.
But I love what they do with him, and I think that the bathroom scene is probably one of the biggest character moments we have in the whole series of any character, because you don't see a side to anyone like that. And that also leads up to obviously their sort of minor duel. But it's different, and I like that about it, because I think everyone can kind of piece. I know I'm jumping on a bit more, that I think everyone knows that Dumbledore's going to have to die by the time these books are over. I mean, J.K. Rowling said it from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And to put it in the whole Snape Malfoy subplot, I think gives it an extra layer, rather than just having someone like Voldemort kill Dumbledore. It would have been too easy that way. So with the whole Malfoy's mission stuff, it just makes it more intriguing, especially for people that don't know what's going to come.
And I mean, the whole, as he talks about, like the Elder Wand, the whole thing with Draco disarming Dumbledore, that plays a huge role in it in the next movie. And I would say this is the peak of sort of Draco's character journey, really, because when we get to Deathly Hallows, I don't think he's in part 1, but he's only really towards the end, isn't he, at Malfoy Manor?
Yeah, I mean, he chooses to save Harry's life, which leads up to the part 2 stuff where he just says he doesn't recognise him, but he clearly does. Yeah. There's a few other moments which they don't skip in, but at the end of the day, it's just establishing that I think he's a good person that's just had a bad upbringing, and that's what this film emphasizes. Narcissa completely 180s by the time you get to Deathly Hallows Part 2. The same with Lucius, so there's a bit of character development with the Malfoy family. At the end of the day, that they care for their son.
And I would say that, I mean, I'll get into it when we talk about Deathly Hallows Part 2, but I watched some behind the scenes stuff of scenes they filmed that didn't even make it into the deleted scenes list, and there is a huge moment, there's a pivotal moment with Draco Malfoy which got cut, which I can't believe they got rid of. So when you get to Part 2, he is kind of back to the despicable troublemaker with his goons like Crabbe and Goyle. Actually, I don't think it's Crabbe and Goyle in the last one, is there? I think one of the actors got done by the police or something, wasn't he? Was he in jail or...?
So Crabbe got caught, I think, buying and selling. I don't know. I think he was dealing weed,
Yeah.
And he got pulled over, and they found it. I think they did his house, and he was growing cannabis. So Crabbe basically got replaced with Blaze, which was a bit of a shame because Crabbe's got some moments in the 7th book, but that's the actor's fault for being a moron.
Yeah, and I know that's jumping the gun. That's going to more Part 2, but there is a moment in that movie which I do want to bring up, which would have been a nice sort of cap off to the events that are established in this one. And the duel you talked about, I mean, the last time I think we saw these two characters duel was the Dueling Club in Chamber of Secrets, which is a very light-hearted moment where we get introduced to Harry being able to speak Parseltongue. In this one, Sectum's Emperor, this is a spell that absolutely wrecks you, and like Harry does it because he's read it in the book. He doesn't even know what it is. He uses it, and it's the moment where Draco just falls, and I think you don't see him fall down, like it suddenly cuts out the sound, and then he rounds the corner and he's got all these like lashings and scratches and cuts all over him. He's just been absolutely sliced up by this spell. And I like when Alan Rickman steps in, because like he obviously came up with that spell, he knows its effects, and he's the only one that can remedy it. And it's a really hard-hitting moment. I mean, I think that's the reason that you chose to make it as the thumbnail for this video. It is a pivotal moment in the film, and I think it's the realization where Harry gets to the moment where he's like, he is one step away from becoming what Voldemort actually is.
Yeah, and what I love with Sectum's Emperor, they don't really go into detail, but the description is it's almost an invisible sword slashing across your body. So you can think of how evil that is, and what leads to a great moment when Snape discovers it. Harry just kind of stands there in silence, and Snape's like, go bring me all of your books right now. So the hints are there, and then obviously he just swaps with Ron's book very quickly. But it's one of those where it's this great moment, Snape realising that Harry's doing this because he's already questioned why Harry's become good at potions when he wasn't before. And it's this brilliant character moment. Harry realises, I've got to get rid of this book because it is bad. They were right all along, blah, blah, blah. Then it just leads to the weird Ginny moment, going back to relationships, which is very forced.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about that with Ginny, and even in the upcoming ones as well, that's just weird. Let's talk about Dumbledore a bit in this one, because this is it's not his last movie. He features in the other ones through flashbacks and weird heavenly visions on train stations, but this one is the one where the character dies. And this is where... I don't know if this is the one where we get a real sense of his character. I would say that comes through the flashbacks in Deathly Hallows Part 2 through Snape's memories, where we see what kind of character Dumbledore really is. We talked about the whole Richard Harris thing and how Gambon is much more believable in these last few roles, and I would say the same for this one too. The bit where they go into that cave to get the locket and he has to drink the potion is probably one of my favourite scenes in the film. And it's really disturbing to watch because he preps Harry before, saying that this potion could paralyse me, it could make me forget everything, it could be the most just torturous pain I've ever had to bear, but you've got to keep making me drink this potion. And how Gambon plays it, and the editing in this scene as well, how just frantic it is, and you get the sense that Harry is having to constantly keep going up and filling this potion. And just the expressions that Gambon's pulling and how he's shouting, you do really feel sorry for him, you feel pity for him. And I think it's called the Potion of Despair, isn't it? And it shows you your greatest despair in the world. And I was watching the clip on YouTube again before I even watched the movie, and some people were bringing up some of the lore. I think he says that it's not my fault, and people were saying that that is a throwback to when his sister died, Ariana, which gets brought up in Deathly Hallows Part 2. How he blames himself for her death. I don't know if that is what he's referring to, but even with the Fantastic Beasts movie, without going into too much what's going to eventually happen with that, if it does get to that part in the movie when you get to this one and you've got that connective thread between all of the Fantastic Beasts films and the Harry Potter ones, I think that moment's going to have even more impact.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to say, but you beat me to it. He sort of mentions, it wasn't my fault. I think he says something like, take me, not the others. And you find out in the next book, that it's all about Grindelwald and him, that he's kind of responsible. I'm not going to go into spoilers on it because I think that it's going to get explored far more in Fantastic Beasts.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, Ariana's dead at the point of Fantastic Beasts, but the Grindelwald stuff, they will explore that for sure, which will be very intriguing. And you're right, I didn't think of it, but that probably will make that moment more impactful in the film, because we've never seen Dumbledore vulnerable. Even when he was dueling Voldemort, he was comfortably in control. And you just see him like on his knees crying, and then ultimately what follows is his death. But you do get that awesome moment where he's got all the fire around him that he has recovered from the potion.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't put two and two together until I read that comment, and I think that even how the films are structured, as a casual fan, you probably wouldn't pick up on that at all, because it's a very quick audio clip in that moment. And because he's babbling on and just like rambling as he's drinking this potion, you could probably just chalk it up to like being insane, this potion. Like, we don't really know much about it. And then it's not until 2 films later where Aberforth talks about his sister. And by that point, we probably forgot what he was even saying when he was drinking the potion, and you won't connect the 2 dots. And even Aberforth creates the picture that maybe he doesn't care about his sister, like he never talks about her, he never brings it up. Brings more credence to the fact that he's suppressed the memories, and that's why he says it in Half-Blood Prince. But I don't think it's really explicitly made clear that that's what he's referring to, and it wasn't until I read that comment that I realised what he was talking about. But maybe, as I said with Fantastic Beasts, if it does lead to that, we'll get a greater sense of that. And so that scene's all fantastic. I love that one. And then, I don't know if this is a book thing as well, another weird thing is those golem things that come out of the water. I'm not sure what they are. I guess they're just magical creatures that are guarding the place. But it is kind of a weird moment where they start emerging from the water trying to get them. I'm not sure if that's developed in the book or if it's just said that these are certain magical creatures.
They are called the Inferi, and they're quite cool what they are. They're all of Voldemort's victims.
Oh, okay.
So,
that would have been cool.
I don't know if this is a spoiler for what's going to happen in Fantastic Beasts, but they mentioned that Grindelwald used an army of Inferi before.
Ooh.
That's literally just come to my mind in the last 30 seconds, so I don't know if I've just literally spoiled the next 3 films for myself. Whether or not they want to explore that, we don't know. But Voldemort uses the Inferi to guard, obviously, a Horcrux, which leads to the death of Regulus Black, which isn't explored, but we find out about that in the 7th book. But it's this great moment, but they're so randomly there, and it does make for this horrific jump scare moment.
Yeah.
When in the book they kind of tease them at the start, like the whole propaganda of that Voldemort's back is like, beware for this will help you away from Inferi, blah blah blah. So they're mentioned once or twice, and then they just appear randomly. So I prefer the way they do it in the film, that they're there and you don't know about it. But it's these kind of weird, terrifying creatures. Some of them are like limbs and conjoined together because they've been down there so long. But it's just a very creepy concept. But you're right, they look like Gollum and they are in a cave.
See, I would have loved that if they'd have said, if Dumbledore had made a comment saying that these are the victims of Lord Voldemort. That's awesome. I'd have loved that. Like, these are kind of like the lost souls that have been trapped down here. That would have at least given some explanation as to why they're there, and it makes sense that they'd be sort of like guarding the locket, although we learned that this isn't the actual Horcrux locket, it's just a fake. But that would have been cool. But every time I watch the movie, I'm like, what are these things and why are they here? But it does make for one of the coolest moments of Dumbledore. Doesn't quite top the duel between him and Voldemort in the previous movie, but when he does that flaming wheel around him, and I think that's actually the front cover of the book. It's a great moment, and it shows that even though Dumbledore is weakened, he's still got it. Like, he can still whip out the magic if he wants to. And then this ultimately culminates into the big emotional finale of the movie where Dumbledore gets to the tower and is killed. Another great moment with Tom Felton as well, where he's aiming the wand at Dumbledore and he says, like, I have to do this, otherwise they're going to kill me. And he's sort of, his voice is cracking, he's welling up as he's saying it. And Dumbledore, it's a nice moment with Dumbledore as well, because as he said, like, although Draco Malfoy won't admit it, you can tell in this one scene that they do have respect for each other. And it's heartbreaking when Dumbledore says the line, I think it's in this movie, where he says he's just a boy that made all the wrong choices. I can't remember if it's this one or if that's in Deathly Hallows. But it's a great exchange between the two. And then ultimately we learn that the whole plan was that Snape has to do it anyway. If Draco Malfoy won't do it, then Snape's got to step in. And see, I don't remember having that moment where I thought Snape's an ultimate traitor, and then having that moment of where he gets redeemed in Deathly Hallows Part 2. I always saw Snape as a good guy. Even when he killed Dumbledore, I thought there was more to it. I don't know if you, because you read the book obviously and watched the movie, did you have that moment where Snape was revealed as like an ultimate villain?
In all honesty, I don't remember, because I read 6 so young. I think I must have been 8 or 9 when the 6th book came out. I just remember Dumbledore dying. Almost nothing else from that book. So it was a bit okay. And then Snape's memories are the most memorable things of the 7th book. I've always had in my head Snape was a good guy, but I would love to have had a chance to sort of wipe my mind and watch these films not knowing that Snape was the good guy all along, because people must have been shell-shocked that hadn't read the books. I mean, because it's so well thought of, and you wouldn't think of the Lily stuff either. I know we're jumping the barrel here, but it's the whole Dumbledore where he says Severus please, and rather than say like do it like Palpatine, he just it's just like he just savagely Avada Kedavra's him. And at this point the soundtrack is on probably one of the strongest songs of the Harry Potter films, and you get the mid-air slow-mo, which to this day I haven't laughed recently, but I used to laugh all the time. Tears would flow of hilarity, not sadness. And I think now I've seen the online meme of Dumble Dab where he's dabbing in midair in slow-mo. It's really well seen, but it's what follows when, you know, everyone's out in the courtyard and they put their wands in the air, and that's probably one of the strongest scenes of the entire franchise, I think, in all honesty. And
Madame Pomfrey comes back as well in a cameo in this one.
Pomfrey's crying. I think McGonagall's the strongest bit when she's absolutely devastated, because I love McGonagall.
Yeah. And
she has some... She's so much Sasha in the books, but she has some brilliant lines, even if she's got a few of them in this film. Especially at the start when she's kind of mocking Harry and Ron for laughing at the year 7s, you could say. But the final third of this film is so well done, and it's just very strong and very well put together.
And going back to the Snape thing, I think the reason I never knew that, like, I still didn't think that Snape was a bad guy, is because his delivery when he does Avada Kedavra, it looks like he is sad about it, like he doesn't want to do it himself. And I think that's just testament to Alan Rickman and just how he played Snape in this one. It's his best role in my opinion. I love Snape so much. Culminates more in Deathly Hallows Part 2, granted, but even in this one he has a lot to do, and I think he plays it fantastically. And didn't you say that they originally filmed a funeral scene for Dumbledore, but they either cut it and they just replaced it with the wands in the sky with the lights with Lumos?
Yeah, so the final chapter of the book is the funeral, and everyone's there, from Rita Skeeter to Cornelius Fudge to the new Minister of Magic. Everyone and anyone turns up. And the funeral's at Hogwarts, which makes sense to why he gets buried there, because he wanted to be buried at Hogwarts. And obviously the White Tomb actually does make a little appearance in the 7th film and the book, so it's slight importance. And apparently they filmed it, and they just cut it. It's not a deleted scene. I think they said if you go from the wands in the air to the funeral, it's too similar and it doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
So I would say fair play to them, because the wands in the air is probably one of the most powerful moments they have in the entirety of the franchise. But it would have been nice to have seen the funeral just to see how many of the cameos they could have had turn up for it, I think.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's... I think it's just before this, actually, but the bit where after Dumbledore is dead, again, the sheer joy on Helena Bonham Carter's face with Bellatrix Lestrange, where she's just rampaging through Hogwarts. I think she's walking down the tables in the Great Hall. She's like kicking all the plates and cups off, and just the sheer joy. It's like exactly like the moment when she killed Sirius Black. I love her character again. She's not in this one as much as the other one, I wouldn't say, but her impact's still there. And the bit where like Harry's trying to get revenge on Snape as well, and he's like throwing spells at him, but Snape's just sort of like backhanding him to the ground. It's a great moment. And that's why I would say with this movie, I would say that the ending is the best part of it. Not that the rest of the movie is bad, but I would say the rest is very much a bridging movie to get you to the next film. And it's really from the part where Dumbledore's having to drink the potion up until the ending where the real action kicks in. And even then, I would say, in terms of action, it's more character-driven action rather than giant spectacle. I think you get that one shot with the flame spell that Dumbledore does, and really that's it in terms of your spectacle in this movie.
Yeah, and that's what I think with the film they do add in, because of the lack of spectacle. They have to add in that burrow scene, which I really dislike because it's a bit pointless in all honesty. But when they do have the spectacle, it is really well done, which is why I kind of mentioned earlier, you don't understand why they don't have the budget to do the green screen properly, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But again, leading up to the final film, maybe it does help that you have a setup film with less action, because there is a moment with the astronomy tower. In the book, there's a big, not battle underneath, but there's 5 or 6 Death Eaters dueling with Dumbledore's army, because they come down for it, and it makes sense to go to it because they said if we had a battle at Hogwarts, even a short 2-3 minute one, it would completely ruin the next film. So it made sense to cut that because you want to see a battle at Hogwarts done properly, which they do.
Yeah.
Although it would have been really cool to see Flitwick and McGonagall fighting together.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is just a really, really quick aside. I was just sort of looking at the film locations because I was wondering where they did that cave from. It was with the whole potion thing. It's the Cliffs of Moher that were used for the exterior of the Horcrux cave. But every time when I watched it a second time, it kind of reminded me of Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl. What is it? Isla de Muerta?
Yeah.
It just reminded me of that. I was expecting to see like Barbossa in there with like a whole chest full of Aztec gold or something. But we really just need to talk about the soundtrack, I would say. Then we can round out on this one. So Nicholas Hooper returns after he scored Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. We talked about the soundtrack to that movie. How you love this one. I think it's one of your favourite soundtracks in the film. Order of the Phoenix soundtrack's fantastic. With this one, I can't really remember any of the music though, and that's not to say it's a bad soundtrack. When I watch the film, it completely fits the movie, but I can remember some of the songs in Order of the Phoenix, and this one I'm really hard pushed to remember any new themes. It seems like it's very more background orientated in this movie. There's
some really good stuff with the relationship one. There's a great when Hermione's doing the crying of the birds. The soundtrack's quite strong there. The opening scene is one of my favourite songs of the franchise. It's got the great moment where it's kind of flashing back to Sirius's death with the choir, which does come later into Dumbledore's funeral, but then you get the really cool scene with the Death Eaters on London, and just the soundtrack's awesome. You finally get a bit of a Death Eater theme, which they kind of fully explore in the next soundtrack. But I don't know, I think Nicholas Hooper was one of the strongest additions to the Potter films. Obviously, you can't compare him as John Williams, and Alexander Desplat does really well with the next film. But even with Fantastic Beasts, I like that these films, they've got very good soundtracks, and I think not enough blockbusters do these days, especially if you look at the sort of Marvel ones. But it's very strong, and I do like what they do with it. There's some really great moments. Even the Slughorn stuff in his classroom's got some little cool bits of music.
I think what I'm going to have to do is I think I'm going to have to just like sit down one day and from like Goblet of Fire onwards listen to all the soundtracks. I know the soundtracks to Deathly Hallows Part 1 and Part 2, I think they're a little bit more stand out in the actual film themselves, but these middle few ones, I remember little bits, but I think I need to just sit down and listen to the entire album one time so I can get the music ingrained in my head. And that really just leaves for favourite scenes, but I don't know if we've talked about most of them. Do you have any other favourite scenes that we haven't talked about? Any other scenes you want to talk about with this movie?
I think the majority of them are there. The opening scene, the Dumbledore stuff in the cave. I don't know, do you have any others?
I think we've covered most of the main ones. I think most of my favourite scenes in this one are the big dramatic character moments, either with all the stuff with Malfoy or with Snape or with Dumbledore towards the end. I think that's pretty much it otherwise. And I know that this might be our shortest review we've done on the Harry Potter films so far. We're still underneath an hour, but this isn't a bad movie, don't get me wrong, and there is a lot of stuff in this movie that sets up for the other ones, but that's really what it is. It is a lot of setup to get us to Deathly Hallows, which isn't a bad thing. It's still done its own right, and you can still watch it as a movie on its own, but a lot of the focus is on that stuff, I would say. But it's a great movie. It's going to be really tough when we get to Deathly Hallows Part 2 if we are going to rank the movies in order of our favourite to least favourite, because each one of the movies does have a good moment in it or some integral moment which takes you to the next movie. But yeah, I would, if I'm going to give recommendation, if people haven't seen it already, I would recommend Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. I think it's one that probably benefits with multiple viewings. As I said, when I first watched it the first time, I really didn't care for it. I thought it focused too much on the relationship side, and it really didn't have enough meat to the story to justify the film. But after watching it a second time a couple of weeks ago, because I had seen Deathly Hallows, when I went back to this one, it was kind of that Harry Potter film like an undiscovered Harry Potter film, and I was noticing a lot more that was set up in this movie, which fleshes out the future ones, and I really enjoyed watching this a second time. I think that the delay of time that I had between my first viewing of it with the second one definitely helped my enjoyment of it, and I will now be watching this one a lot more because I do think it is an important one in the Harry Potter franchise.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the films that benefits most from the second viewing, especially once you watch them all together, than some of the earlier ones, and I think it's very underrated as well.
Yeah, definitely, and so I guess that'll do it for our review on Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Be sure to comment, subscribe, let us know what you thought of the movie, the book, any of the other Harry Potter movies, and I guess Fantastic Beasts and where to find them now, or though I guess keep the spoilers to a minimum if you are going to talk about that movie. In terms of what's coming up on the channel, we are still very much in Harry Potter month. We will have reviews for Deathly Hallows Part 1 and Part 2 in the upcoming weeks. There'll be a special top 10 video on favourite Harry Potter moments, and towards the end of the month, or like the first week into December, we will be finishing off with a special Battle of the Brackets new episode where we'll be talking about our favourite Harry Potter character, so that's going to be an interesting one. In between that, there'll be more reaction videos from me. There'll be more movie reviews as well with other films that are coming out. For example, Allied next week, or I guess this week actually. I'll be at that, so I'll be doing a review on that. So do hit that subscribe button. It's the best way to keep updated with all of our content, and until the next video, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening.